The sunlight that crept through the small cracks in her thin curtains felt intrusive, almost disrespectful, as though the day itself had arrived without permission. She sat before the sewing machine, motionless, with her hands resting lightly on her lap, the lines in her palms still holding the memory of the needle, the thread, and the weight of a dream that had been tossed into a trash can. The room smelled faintly of old fabric and dried lavender, scents that usually comforted her, but now drifted around her like reminders of a life that had always been second to someone else's comfort, someone else's ambition. For a long time she did nothing. Not a stitch. Not a breath deeper than the bare minimum needed to stay alive. She stared ahead at nothing and yet at everything. The walls that had seen her laugh when Zuri took her first steps, the floor that had felt her knees when she begged the landlord for a few extra days, the machine that had whispered to her through grief and hunger, the window where her daughter used to sit, asking innocent questions about the world she hadn't yet learned was cruel. Hours passed, though she didn't count them. Time became a kind of fog, drifting around her body, settling in her bones. Her chest felt heavy, raw, scraped out. But inside that hollow space something small was moving, shifting like an ember refusing to die out. Pain she understood. Loss she accepted. But this new feeling, this quiet, icy calm, was foreign, and it frightened her more than any heartbreak ever had. She rose slowly, almost reluctantly, as though gravity itself wanted to keep her seated. Her legs felt stiff from the long walk back, and her feet ached from the weight of disappointment she had carried with every step. When she walked to the kitchen, the house creaked beneath her, an old, complaining companion. She poured water into a rusted kettle, the kind she kept even though it leaked a little, because some things, despite their flaws, had shared history with her. She lit the stove. The flame snapped to life, a bright, sudden burst of heat that startled her. She watched the flame closely. It reminded her of her own youth, quick to start, easy to burn, eager to warm others, never herself. Steam began to rise. The kettle whistled softly. She didn't move to silence it. Instead, she let the sound fill the room, echoing faintly against the walls, until it turned into something like a cry. Only then did she turn off the flame. She poured the hot water over dried hibiscus petals, their deep crimson bleeding slowly into the cup. The color spread like sorrow, blooming into something dark and beautiful. She lifted the cup, breathed in the earthy, tart aroma, and took a sip. The taste was sharp, almost punishing. But she welcomed it. Pain she understood. Sweetness she didn't trust. When she returned to her sewing table, she sat down with a heavy sigh and reached out. Her fingers brushed the petal gently, like touching a sleeping child. The metal felt cold, lifeless. She remembered how it used to vibrate beneath her foot when she was younger, stronger, filled with dreams she didn't dare voice because they sounded too big for someone like her. The machine had been her mother's first, and sometimes she wondered if the sorrow she felt now was the same sorrow her mother had known. The same exhaustion. The same quiet hope that kept flickering no matter how many times life tried to blow it out. She had inherited more than the machine. She had inherited the burden. And today it felt heavier than ever. But as she sat there, something shifted. A memory, faint but stubborn, rose from deep within her. Zuri, only 6 years old, tugging at her skirt while she worked. "Mommy, can I sew too?" "No, baby. The needle is sharp." "But I'm brave." "Yes," she had whispered back then, "but bravery must wait until your hands are steady." Her child had been so full of light once. So eager, so open. That memory stung. It clung to her like a hand reaching through time, demanding she remember the sweetness before the bitterness. But life had changed Zuri. The world had polished her until she believed shine was worth more than soul. And now she rejected the things that once made her feel safe. Rejected the woman who had fought through hunger and exhaustion to keep her alive. The mother lowered her head and exhaled slowly. The breath trembled on its way out. Her mind returned to the moment Zuri tossed the dress into the trash. The sound of fabric hitting waste, the muffled thud, the quiet gasp she swallowed down. Each replay cut deeper. She hadn't just thrown away a gown. She had thrown away years. Memories. Sacrifices. She had thrown away the last piece of innocence her mother still held. A numbness settled over her, slow and spreading. It wasn't the numbness of defeat. It was something else. Something colder. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table as though steadying herself against a tide that threatened to pull her under. But she didn't drown. Not this time. She lifted her head and stared at the sewing machine again. Something inside her began to tighten. Not like fear but like resolve. Like a thread being pulled taut before the stitch is made. In the silence of the room, she heard her own heartbeat. Low, steady, but firmer than before. Then outside, footsteps past her window. Neighbors on their way to work. Children running, shouting. A dog barking. Life moved. Life continued. And for the first time all morning, she blinked with purpose. She stood and walked toward the door. Her movements were slower than usual, but they carried something unfamiliar. Weight, purpose, determination. She stepped outside into the sunlight, blinking at its brightness, and looked down the street as though expecting an answer from the horizon. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. But she knew this. Something inside her had shifted permanently. Something inside her had woken up after years of being quiet. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. She did not walk with direction, only with need. The street stretched ahead, lined with familiar houses, each with its own story, its own heartbeat. The morning sun warmed the cracked pavement, but she barely felt it. Her mind drifted with each step, unraveling memories she had tried to forget, stitching new thoughts into old wounds. Her sandals tapped lightly against the ground. She had worn these for nearly 5 years now, resoling them twice, trimming frayed straps, adding a new buckle the day she couldn't afford a replacement. They had carried her through markets, funerals, hospital visits, grocery aisles, and countless trips to pick up Zuri from school. These sandals had walked the weight of her life. Yet today they felt like they carried a stranger. A gentle breeze brushed against her cheeks, drying the tears she didn't realize had escaped. She lifted a hand to her face and touched the moisture, surprised to find the softness of her own grief. She turned the corner and found herself in front of the small community park where she used to bring Zuri. The swings creaked softly in the wind. The old slide, once shining silver, had dulled. Over the years, its surface scratched with the initials of forgotten children. She paused, her eyes drifting to the large oak tree at the center of the park. Zuri used to sit under that tree. She would bring her dolls, scraps of fabric sewn together with mismatched buttons for eyes, and play for hours, building little worlds where everything was safe and loving and fair. The mother could almost hear her child's laughter, echoing gently through the leaves like a ghost of a happier time. A tight ache formed in her chest. She remembered the afternoon when she had surprised Zuri with a doll dressed in real lace, leftover pieces from a wealthy bride's gown she had worked on. Zuri had held the doll against her chest, eyes bright, as though she'd been given a piece of magic. "Mommy, someday. Will you make my wedding dress too?" "Yes," she had whispered. "I'll make it the most beautiful dress in the world." The memory hit her with such force she had to grip the worn park bench to steady herself. She hadn't just failed her daughter. Her daughter had forgotten the promise she used to treasure. The world had polished Zuri's dreams, but stripped away her roots. The mother slowly sat on the bench. The wood was cool, slightly damp from morning dew. She rested her hands in her lap, palms open, as if waiting for something to fall into them. Hope, answers, strength. Nothing. Children passed by, running to school with bright backpacks. Some wave. Most didn't notice her. She watched them with a distant tenderness. Mothers walked behind them, calling out reminders. Finish your lunch, don't forget your homework, look both ways before crossing. She once called out such reminders too. Little pieces of love disguised as instructions. A long, trembling breath left her chest. She pressed her fingertips together, grounding herself. Her mind drifted back to the dress, the one lying somewhere deep in the trash, wrinkled and stained by rejection. It wasn't the dress that hurt her. It was the look in Zuri's eyes. That cold judgment. That quiet cruelty. Her daughter had become a stranger. The wind strengthened, tugging at the ends of her headscarf. She tucked it behind her ear and stood slowly. She didn't know where she meant to go next, but her feet carried her toward the small grocery store on the corner. She entered quietly, the bell above the door jingling in a shrill tone. The store smelled of spices, detergent, and freshly baked bread. She walked slowly between the aisles, running her fingers along the edges of cans and boxes. Ordinary things. Simple things. Things she understood. The familiarity soothed her in a way she desperately needed. She paused near the tea shelf, picking up a box of the blend she always bought when she was heartbroken. She placed it gently into her basket, as though selecting medicine. The shopkeeper, Mr. Daniels, noticed her. He was a kind man, gray-haired and slightly round, always ready with a soft smile. He approached her slowly, sensing something fragile in her demeanor. "You're up early today," he said gently. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. He nodded, understanding more than she said. "Long nights happen to all of us." She forced a small smile. "Some longer than others." He hesitated, then reached for a packet of honey sticks and placed them in her basket. "On the house. Sweet things help bitter days go down easier." Her eyes softened. She whispered, "Thank you," and continued walking. But as she reached the checkout counter, she realized she couldn't bring herself to buy anything. Not tea, not bread, not even comfort. Her mind felt too full. Her hands too empty. She returned the items slowly, almost guiltily, and gave Mr. Daniels an apologetic nod before leaving. The world outside felt too bright now. Too exposed. She made her way back home, each step heavier than before. When she entered her small house, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, letting her weight sink into the wood. For a long moment, she simply stood there, trapped between the urge to collapse and the instinct to keep standing. The room felt different now. Quieter, heavier, almost as though it knew something inside her had snapped. The sewing machine sat at the table, watching her with metallic patience. She approached it slowly, like approaching an old friend she had disappointed. She touched the top of it with trembling fingers. The cool metal steadied her heartbeat. She exhaled, a long, silent release of everything she had held inside since dawn. Then, without warning, something inside her broke open, not with an explosion, but with a quiet, dangerous clarity. She pulled out the stool and sat. She placed her foot on the pedal, not pressing, just feeling it. Feeling the weight of her choices. Feeling the years she had given. Feeling the years she still had to endure. A thought formed in her mind, soft at first, then sharper, clearer, darker. A mother's love was powerful. A mother's pain even more. But a mother's resolve. That could reshape the world. And for the first time in her life, she did not feel powerless. She felt aware. Aware of the lines she had erased for Zuri. Aware of the sacrifices she had made. Aware of the silence she had endured. Her fingers curled into fists. Change always began in silence. And hers had just begun. She remained seated in front of the sewing machine, staring at it as though it held every answer she had ever searched for. The quiet hum of the house pressed around her, the kind of silence that felt alive, breathing, watching, waiting. A faint thread hung from the machine's needle, swaying gently as the air shifted. It looked like a single, fragile lifeline. She reached for the small drawer beneath the table and pulled it open. Inside lay scraps of fabric, half-used spools of thread, dull scissors, and a faded notebook she had once used to sketch designs. She lifted the notebook carefully, brushing off the thin layer of dust. Her heart tightened as she opened to the first page. Her handwriting greeted her in soft curves, notes scribbled beside rough sketches, dresses she once dreamed of making for clients who never came, costumes for school plays, designs meant for people who couldn't afford them, and yet she made them anyway. She flipped through each page, every drawing a reminder of what she once wanted to be, what she once believed she could be. She paused on a sketch she had made for Zuri years ago, a small dress with layered petals around the hem, inspired by the flowers Zuri had loved picking from the neighbor's garden. Zuri was 5 when she wore it. She had spun in circles, giggling as the petals fluttered around her like soft wings. "You made me look like a fairy," Zuri had said. "You've always been one," she had replied. Her throat tightened. She closed the notebook gently. The house felt too still, too full of memories pressed into the walls. She needed air. She stepped outside onto the small porch, gripping the railing as she looked down the street. The day had grown warmer, and neighbors were beginning to drag out their morning routines. Cars starting, dogs barking, someone sweeping their front steps. Ordinary life went on around her while something inside her shifted, slowly but unmistakably. A young woman across the street watered her plants. The wave. The mother lifted her hand weakly in response. She wondered if anyone could see the fracture beneath her skin, if grief had a color, a weight, a shape visible to others. She doubted it. Grief was invisible unless it was loud. Her steps carried her down the porch and onto the sidewalk without conscious thought. She walked slowly, letting the world blur around her. She passed houses she had known for years, ones with peeling paint, ones with neat fences, ones with toys scattered across lawns. Each held stories, lives intertwined with hers in small, quiet ways. She reached the old bookshop on the next block, a place she rarely visited but always admired. Its windows were filled with second-hand novels, their spines faded from years in the sun. She stood in front of the door for a moment before gently pushing it open. A soft chime rang above her. The air inside smelled of paper and dust, warm and comforting. Stacks of books climbed toward the ceiling, some leaning precariously. The old wooden floor creaked beneath her feet. Mrs. Wallace, the elderly woman who owned the shop, sat behind the counter with her glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up, her expression softening. "My dear," she said, "you look like someone carrying more than her share." The mother's lips parted, but no words came out. She simply nodded. "Come," Mrs. Wallace said, pushing her register aside and slowly standing. "Sit with me." They sat in a pair of mismatched chairs near the window. Light streamed through the glass, giving the moment a quiet, fragile glow. "Tell me," the older woman whispered. But the mother didn't tell her about the dress, or the words Zuri had said, or how deeply they had cut. Instead, she spoke about the dreams she used to have, the ones she had set aside, the ones she no longer believed belonged to her. Mrs. Wallace listened without interruption, her eyes gentle, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When the mother finished speaking, the shopkeeper reached across and took her hand. "You haven't lost your dream," she said softly. "You simply forgot where you put it." The words hit her unexpectedly hard. She felt something tremble inside her. A breath, a spark, a memory of strength. Mrs. Wallace smiled faintly. "And dear, you must remember, people change. Children change. But love." She shook her head gently. "Love does not disappear. Hides. Wait. Sometimes it hurts. But it does not vanish." The mother blinked away the wetness in her eyes. She stayed there for a while longer, letting the calm settle in her bones. When she finally stood to leave, Mrs. Wallace handed her a small book, its cover worn at the edges, the title faint. "For you," she said. "You need stories too." The mother accepted it with a gratitude she couldn't voice. Outside, the sun seemed a little softer, the wind a little kinder. She walked home slowly, clutching the book against her chest, as though it held something fragile and warm. When she reached her doorstep, she paused, taking in the quiet shape of her home. She felt different, not healed, not resolved, but steadier. A foundation forming beneath her feet. She entered her house once more. The sewing machine still waited patiently. The light through the window painted the room in soft gold. She set the book on the table and placed her hands on the fabric she had abandoned earlier, the one she had been working on before everything fell apart. Her fingers moved slowly at first, smoothing the cloth. Then, more firmly, she began aligning edges, trimming uneven corners, pinning seams. She worked with quiet focus, her breath steadying as she moved. Not because Zuri asked for it, not because anyone expected it, but because creating was the only way she knew to gather the scattered pieces of herself. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch, quiet rebuilding. Kind no one saw, the kind that mattered most. The sun hung low in the sky, spilling its honey-gold light across the narrow street where she lived. Evening always came quietly here. No grand colors, no dramatic sunsets, just a fading of brightness like a sigh, soft surrender. But tonight, something in the air felt different, heavier, sharper, as though the world sensed the shift inside her. She stood outside her small home for a long time, her hand resting on the doorframe. The wooden frame was worn smooth by years of coming and going, years of searching for miracles. Years of returning home with more burdens than she'd left with. She drew in a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of dust, fading sunlight, and the faint lingering sweetness of the jasmine vines growing along the wall. Her heart was still raw from what had happened, but the pain was beginning to take a new shape, no longer the soft ache of disappointment, but something colder, sharper, more resolute. She stepped inside. The house welcomed her with its usual silence. No chatter. No warmth. Just the hum of memories. She set her bag down, inhaling deeply as she walked toward her sewing table. The machine sat there like an old friend waiting patiently for her return. Had always been there. For her. With her. Through storms and calm waters. Through nights when she cried until her throat burned. Through mornings when she stitched hope into the hems of dresses for strangers who would never know her name. She traced her fingers over the metal surface. Cool, steady, familiar. Simple machine. But tonight it felt like a weapon. Or perhaps a voice. She sat down slowly, her bones heavy with exhaustion. Sleep tugged at her, but she pushed it away. She couldn't sleep tonight. Not with the image of Zuri tossing her heart into a trash can still burning behind her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the machine's lid. The faint click echoed through the room, a sound she knew too well. She breathed out long and slow, letting the weight of the night settle around her. The machine whirred to life with a low, vibrating hum. That sound had once meant comfort. Now it felt like a summons. She reached for a piece of fabric. Something simple, nothing special. Not yet. She didn't know what she would make. She didn't know why her fingers felt restless, or why her mind felt sharper than it had in years. But she knew one thing: she had to sew. She had to do something with the storm inside her. As her hands began to move, her breath steadied. Hill. Bread. Wool. Sill. Guide. Her body remembered even when her heart faltered. She didn't notice how long she worked. Minutes blurred into hours. Time softened at the edges. All she knew was the whisper of fabric beneath her fingers, the steady hum of the machine, the echo of her daughter's cruel words, and the lingering sting of betrayal that refused to fade. At some point she stopped. Not because she wanted to, but because her vision blurred. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even realized she was crying. It fell onto the fabric, spreading into a small dark bloom. She placed the cloth down gently and leaned back, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her chest felt tight, as though her ribs were trying to hold in all the years she had spent loving too hard, forgiving too easily, giving too much. She closed her eyes. Her mind traveled back, not to the moment Zuri humiliated her, but far beyond that. To the early days. To the years when life was still gentle, still soft enough to dream in. She saw herself younger, with smoother skin and brighter eyes. She saw Kofi, her husband, with his warm laugh and rough, calloused hands that held hers like something precious. She saw him coming home from work, dust clinging to his clothes, a smile spreading across his tired face when he saw her waiting in the doorway. And she saw little Zuri, tiny, lively, curious, running into his arms. The memory stabbed her, sweet and painful. She opened her eyes. The house felt cold again. She stood abruptly, needing air, needing space, needing something she couldn't name. The streets were quiet as she stepped outside. A few windows glowed with the warm amber light of families settling in for the night. But she didn't look at them. Her feet moved on their own, as if following memories stronger than her logic. She walked to the old neighborhood tailor shop where she had learned everything she knew. The shop had long been closed, the sign faded, the windows dusty. Yet standing there brought a strange comfort. She pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the chill seep into her skin. She had believed so deeply that sewing would save her life. Maybe it had. Maybe it still would. She turned back toward home slowly, her steps steady, her mind clearer than it had been in days. When she entered her house again, she felt it shift. Not outside. Inside. Thought. A realization. Spark. If her daughter had chosen shame over love, then her story was not over. It was only beginning. She walked to her sewing table again, but this time she wasn't trembling. This time, she knew exactly what she was about to create. She reached for the fabric. She touched the machine. She inhaled deeply. And then, she began. Stitch by slow, deliberate stitch. Thread by thread. Layer by layer. Not with desperation. Not with longing. But with a quiet, growing fire that felt like destiny taking shape under her hands. Tonight wasn't about repairing a wound. Tonight wasn't about grief. Tonight wasn't about a daughter who didn't understand the weight of a mother's love. Tonight was about something else. Something powerful and patient, and sharp like the tip of her needle. Tonight, she was beginning the dress that would change everything. The night deepened around her small home, but inside, the lamp beside her sewing table glowed with a quiet, unwavering strength. It wasn't a bright light. Nothing in her life had ever been bright in the extravagant sense, but it was steady, dependable, like the heartbeat of a woman who had survived too much to collapse now. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't trying to fill silence or distract herself from pain. No. She was creating. And creations born from pain were always different. Always deeper. Always heavier with meaning. The fabric she worked with wasn't luxurious. No silk imported from distant countries. No rare lace crafted by artisans whose names people admired as though they were royalty. But it was strong, durable, ready to be transformed. Much like the woman guiding it through the needle. She reached for a spool of thread. Deep ivory warmer than pure white, the color of old pearls. The spool clicked softly as she set it into place. The sound was comforting, like an old ritual she had performed thousands of times, each one a testament to her survival. Outside, a distant dog barked. Car passed down the street. The world moved on, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place in her dim little room. As she stitched, she found herself murmuring under her breath. Not words, not prayers, just a soft hum. A lullaby she used to sing to Zuri when she was small. A melody that carried the memories of nights when Zuri curled against her chest, tiny fingers gripping her blouse, innocent eyes looking up with absolute trust. A trust that no longer existed. Her humming faltered. For a moment, her hands stilled, the thread pulling loosely in the air. The ache in her chest returned, not sharp like before but deep, heavy, something that settled into her bones. She exhaled slowly and forced her shoulders to relax. She could not afford to break now. Not when she was finally doing something for herself. Not when every stitch carried the weight of what she had endured. She picked up the fabric again, smoothing it gently beneath her palms. The feel of it grounded her. It reminded her who she was. Not the woman her daughter dismissed. Not the shadow who stitched silently behind the scenes of other people's celebrations. She was more. She had always been more. She had simply forgotten. Her needle glided through the cloth, creating a delicate pattern. Not decorative, at least not yet. This was the skeleton. The beginning. The quiet foundation upon which she would build something extraordinary. Something that would speak for her when words failed, as they always had. Hours passed. The lamp flickered once, twice, as if straining to stay awake with her. Shadows danced across the walls, shifting like memories she had long buried beneath responsibility and exhaustion. She paused once to stretch her aching back, pressing her hand against the small of her spine. Pain bloomed there. Dull, familiar, loyal. It had lived with her for years, as constant as her heartbeat. She welcomed it now, strangely grateful for the reminder that she was still alive, still capable, still fighting. Her eyes drifted to the old photograph resting on the shelf above her machine. Kofi. His smile, captured forever in black and white, felt like a warm hand on her shoulder. She rose slowly, lifting the frame and holding it close. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw, the soft curve of his smile. The ache in her chest loosened just a little. "What would you tell me now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, swallowed by the hum of the lamp. For a moment, just a heartbeat, she imagined he spoke back. Not in words. In warmth. In memory. And she knew what his answer would have been. Keep going. She placed the frame gently back on the shelf, but her gaze lingered a moment longer. Returning to her chair, she resumed her work. Her stitches grew steadier, stronger, more confident. What she was creating wasn't just a dress. It was a declaration. A mother's quiet roar. A lifetime of sacrifice shaped into beauty. A reminder that she had not been defeated. Not yet, not ever. The fabric grew under her hands. The pattern evolved. The dress began taking the faintest hint of shape, a whisper of what it would become. She didn't know yet where this path would lead. She didn't know what would happen when Zuri saw the new dress. She didn't know what would happen at the wedding. But she did know this. She was no longer sewing from a place of longing. She was sewing from a place of awakening. Her heart no longer trembled. Her hands no longer hesitated. Her spirit no longer begged for scraps of affection. She stitched until the edges of dawn touched the window again. Soft, pale, quiet. Another night lost to creation. Another layer added to her resolve. When she finally leaned back, exhausted but strangely alive, she gazed at the unfinished piece before her. It wasn't perfect. Not yet. Not even close. But it was hers. A slow, small smile touched her lips. This was only the beginning. The morning light crept through the thin curtains, soft and hesitant, as though uncertain whether it was welcome in a room where the night's devotion still lingered. She blinked slowly, her eyes dry and burning, but she didn't look away from the dress taking shape before her. Fatigue pressed on her limbs, yet a strange energy hummed through her veins, guiding her hands as if they were no longer entirely her own. She rose from her chair and walked toward the small window. The street outside was beginning to stir. Neighbors opening their doors, the distant rumble of delivery trucks, the faint conversations of early risers. Life moved on with its usual rhythm, but inside her room, time felt different. Slower, heavier, more deliberate. Her eyes drifted down to her fingers, calloused, rough, marked with small red pinpricks from the hours of stitching. These hands had fed her daughter. These hands had protected her. These hands had built a life out of nothing but courage and thread. And these same hands would now tell a story the world could no longer ignore. A soft breeze pushed against the window frame, and she closed her eyes, letting the cool air touch her face. For a moment, the ache in her chest softened. She rested her palms on the windowsill and breathed deeply, then turned back toward the table. Her steps were slow but certain. The dress waited. Not the ruined one her daughter had thrown away, not the wounded version of her love, but this new creation, this second birth, this quiet revolution. She slid into her chair again and lifted the fabric, feeling the weight of it settle across her lap. The weight was more than physical. It carried nights of sorrow, moments of awakening, the echoes of a heart that had been bruised again and again, yet somehow still knew how to beat. Slowly, methodically, she threaded a new needle. The metal glinted faintly in the morning light. She hesitated, not out of fear, out of recognition. This next part mattered. This next part would define everything. She closed her eyes and let the memories come, not the painful ones but the ones she had forgotten to cherish. Zuri at 5 years old, holding up a crooked doll made from scraps of leftover fabric, proudly declaring she had made it, just like Mama. Zuri at 8, rushing through the dawn to hug her mother goodbye before school. Zuri at 12, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered, "I want to be like you when I grow up." But people change. Life changes them. Or perhaps life simply reveals what they value most. When she opened her eyes again, she didn't push the memories away. She laid them gently into the folds of the fabric, weaving them into her work with a quiet acceptance that surprised even her. Every stitch was slower now, more intentional, not a plea, not a sacrifice, not a desperate longing for approval, a statement, truth. She worked for hours, barely noticing the time pass. The world outside moved through morning into noon, yet she remained lost in the soft rustle of cloth and the whisper of thread sliding through seams. Her stomach growled once, but she ignored it. Her body could wait. Her spirit could not. She paused only when a shadow crossed her window, another neighbor passing by, perhaps glancing curiously toward her door. She remembered how people in the neighborhood used to call her the quiet tailor. The one who never joined conversations, who never complained, who stitched her worries into the hems of other women's dreams. But today she didn't feel invisible. She bent over the dress again, lifting a section of fabric to the light. The pattern she had begun hours ago had grown into something delicate yet strong, a motif that curled like vines around the edge, subtle but alive. She traced it with her fingertip, marveling at how something so beautiful could come from such quiet determination. Her chest tightened, not with pain but pride. For years she had created beauty for others. This one was for herself. Her voice, her truth, her anger, her love, all sewn into a single garment. She reached for a small wooden box on the shelf above her machine. It was old, carved by her husband during their first year of marriage. The lid creaked open, revealing a bundle of lace she had been saving for decades. Her breath caught. This lace was precious. Rare. In touch. She had once imagined it would adorn her daughter's wedding dress. A quiet dream she carried in the folds of her heart. But dreams were unpredictable things. They grew, they shrank, they died, they transformed. She lifted the lace gingerly, the pattern delicate under her fingers. For a moment she wavered. Should she use it? Should she keep it? Was it wrong to use something she had saved for Zuri? But then she realized something. Zuri had thrown away the first dress not because it lacked lace, but because she could not see her mother's worth. This dress, this new creation, was not for Zuri. It was for the woman she herself was becoming. And with that thought, the hesitation vanished. She pressed the lace gently against the bodice of the dress, and it fit perfectly, as though it had always been meant for this moment. She pinned it in place, each pin a tiny spark of resolve. Hours later, when she finally leaned back, the dress looked transformed. Still incomplete, still waiting for its final evolution. But it glowed softly under the warm lamp, like the beginning of a revelation. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but a small, quiet smile curved her lips. She wasn't done. Not by far. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she had forgotten its warmth. Oh. The sky outside had shifted again, moving from the soft gold of late morning into a muted, pale afternoon. Light filtered differently now, less warm, more diffused, spreading across the room like the calm before a distant storm. She blinked her tired eyes, rubbing a knuckle gently against the lower lid to push back the burn of fatigue. But her hands never strayed far from the dress. Called to her. Not with sound. Not with urgency. But with presence. She lifted the garment once more, letting the fabric spill over her fingers like water. Even unfinished, it felt alive. Full of the things she'd never dared say aloud. Full of the pieces of herself she'd long forgotten to honor. It was strange, she realized, how grief could transform into creation. How heartbreak could sharpen the senses instead of dulling them. Her hands drifted along the seam she'd worked on throughout the morning. Smooth, cohesive, precise. She paused when fingertips brushed a slightly uneven stitch, barely noticeable, yet to her it felt like a tremor in an otherwise steady heartbeat. She didn't correct it. That stitch belonged there. Flaw. Truth. A reminder that beauty did not need to be unscarred. She rested the fabric against her knees and leaned back, stretching her arms until her joints popped softly. Her neck ached. Her back throbbed. Each muscle complained. But beneath the soreness simmered a quiet fire that kept her anchored. The fire of purpose. Her gaze drifted around the room, the yellowed wallpaper peeling at the corners, the small wooden shelves lined with jars of buttons, ribbons, old spools, the framed photo of Kofi, the heap of unused fabric in the corner, the humming machine that had been her companion through the darkest years. This room had seen her at her weakest. Now it would witness her becoming strong. Her stomach rumbled again, louder this time, but she ignored it. Hunger was temporary. This moment was not. She returned her attention to the dress, inhaling the scent of fabric and thread, a smell most people ignored, but one that had been the fragrance of her entire existence. She picked up a small velvet pouch from the drawer beneath her table. Inside were crystal beads, tiny shimmering pieces she had been saving for years. There weren't many, just a handful she'd collected slowly, one bead at a time, whenever she could spare a few coins from grocery money or mending wages. She poured them gently into her palm. They glittered in the soft light, tiny stars cradled in the curve of her hand. She remembered buying the very first bead. Zuri had been 8 years old. She'd pointed at a sparkling wedding dress in a shop window, her little face glowing with awe. "Mama, I want my dress to shine like that one day," she had whispered. And she had promised her daughter she would make that dream come true. Promises were sacred to her. But promises changed. Or rather, people changed, leaving promises homeless. She didn't hesitate this time. She picked up a needle, threaded it with fine silver thread, and began attaching the beads one by one to the lace on the bodice. Each bead caught the light, glimmering faintly. She placed them slowly, thoughtfully, not in a traditional pattern but in a scattered formation that looked like a sky of soft stars blooming across fabric. The dress was evolving, growing, claiming its identity. A soft knock sounded at her door, sudden and unexpected. Her fingers froze mid-stitch. She didn't move, didn't breathe. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it, a sound born from exhaustion. But then the knock came again, louder this time. She set the dress down gently on the table, the beads catching the faint tremor in her hands. Her heart tightened. No one visited her unannounced. Her life was quiet enough that any interruption felt like an intrusion into sacred space. Wiping her palms on her apron, she stood slowly and walked to the door. Her footsteps were cautious. As she approached, she could make out a vague silhouette through the frosted glass. A woman, maybe older, maybe younger, she couldn't tell. She opened the door a crack. "Good afternoon," a familiar voice said. It was Maria, the elderly neighbor from 2 doors down, a woman who had always greeted her with warm smiles and gentle waves, though they rarely spoke beyond polite exchanges. "Maria," she asked softly, opening the door a bit more. "Is everything all right?" Maria's face softened with concern. "I saw your light on all night." She pointed toward the window. "And again this morning. I thought maybe." Her words trailed off as she offered a gentle smile. "I just wanted to check if you were eating. Or resting." Her throat tightened. Resting. Eating. Small things. Basic things. Things she hadn't thought about since Zuri's rejection. She tried to smile, but the expression faltered. "I'm fine," she murmured. Maria's eyes drifted past her, toward the sewing table. "You're working on something important," she observed quietly. She hesitated before nodding. "Yes." Maria didn't step inside, didn't pry. She simply held out a small container wrapped in a towel. "I brought you some stew. I thought, maybe you forgot to cook." Her chest fluttered painfully with gratitude. "I didn't forget," she whispered, her voice thin. "I just didn't feel hungry." Maria placed the container gently on a small side table near the door. "Eat when you can." She squeezed her hand softly. "And remember, you don't always have to carry everything alone." When the door closed again, the room felt different. Not less lonely, just less heavy. She set the stew aside, still unsure whether she would eat it, and returned to her seat. As she lifted the dress once more, she realized her hands were trembling again, not from exhaustion but from something deeper. Connection. She threaded another bead and set it gently into place. The rhythm returned. Low. Deliberate. Wildly human. Her world had been small for so long. Now it was shifting, renewing itself one stitch at a time. As the beads continued to bloom across the fabric, she felt something inside her settle. Not peace. Not yet. But a promise. A new one. Made not to Zuri, not to Kofi, not to the world. But to herself. The air that morning felt different. Still familiar, but carrying a tension that stretched across the walls like an invisible thread pulled too tight. She woke earlier than usual, not because of noise or nightmares, but because something inside her had shifted overnight. Certainty. A quiet, pulsing awareness that the path ahead was no longer the same one she'd been walking for years. She lay still for a few moments, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling. They formed thin, branching lines, fractures that had spread slowly over time, like delicate roots searching for something deeper beneath the surface. She felt like those cracks, split open, widened, exposed, yet strangely stronger for it. Light slipped through the curtains in pale, cool stripes. Dawn was still deciding whether it wanted to become a full day or retreat back into darkness again. She didn't blame it. She understood what it meant to hesitate. Her body ached as she rose from bed. Too many hours of work. Too little sleep. But exhaustion didn't bother her this morning. It felt like a familiar companion rather than a burden. She moved quietly across the room, her breath soft, almost reverent, as though she didn't want to disturb the delicate balance of whatever was changing inside her. The dress hung near the window now, catching the early light in a way that made it look alive. The beads shimmered like dew caught on spider silk, each sparkle a small, defiant heartbeat. She paused in front of it, fingertips brushing the edge of the bodice. There was so much of her in this dress. Her grief, her hope, her silent prayers, her long nights of stitching pieces of herself back together. But there was something else now too. Shift. A widening in the story she was stitching. For the first time, she wondered if the dress wasn't simply meant for someone, but meant from someone. Born from a place deeper than purpose or obligation. A soft breeze slipped in through the cracked window, lifting the hem of the dress just slightly, like a nod, like an acknowledgement between old friends. She stepped back and let the moment settle, her hands sinking into her apron pockets. She had decisions to make. She could feel their weight pressing gently against her ribs. The kettle whistled faintly from the small stove, a sound that usually irritated her in the morning, but today it felt grounding. She poured water slowly into a chipped cup, watching steam rise in soft curls. As she sipped, her eyes moved again to the dress. Not finished. Not yet. Close. And that closeness frightened her in a way she hadn't expected. Finishing the dress meant acknowledging what came after. Facing what she'd been outrunning for years. Accepting truths she wasn't ready to name. She set the cup down and took a deep breath, steadying her hands. There was still work to do. Delicate work, the kind that required both precision and surrender. She pulled a low stool beside the window and brought the dress into her lap. Sunlight brushed the fabric gently, illuminating the texture of the lace and the soft glow of the crystals. She took a needle, threaded it carefully, and began working on the final seam running down the back of the bodice. Each stitch was small, slow, intentional. Not rushed, not forced, like breathing. Her mind wandered as she worked. Back to the years she'd spent watching other people's lives unfold through windows. Back to the promises she'd kept long after anyone remembered them. Back to the woman she used to be before everything fractured. She didn't cry. She didn't break. Instead she stitched. As the final seam neared completion, a knock echoed through the room. Not loud, not abrupt. More like the gentle tap of someone unsure whether they should be there. Her heart tightened. She set the dress aside slowly, the fabric whispering against her fingers as it fell into place. She wiped her palms on her apron, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The knock came again, a little more firmly this time. She walked to the door with quiet, measured steps. She hesitated, letting her hand hover over the handle for a moment before she finally turned it. The hallway outside glowed with mid-morning light. And standing there, hands clasped together, eyes uncertain, chest rising and falling with unspoken words, was someone she never expected to see again. Her daughter, older now, sharper around the edges, but undeniably hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world narrowed to that small doorway, to the space between them, to the breaths they took in fragile synchronization. Zuri's voice, when it finally came, trembled with something raw. "Mama, I didn't know where else to go." The words hit her like a wave, cold, overwhelming, unstoppable. Her knees weakened, her breath faltered, her world shifted again. But her voice, when it emerged, was softer than she expected. Wounded, yes, but still hers. "Come inside," she whispered. Zuri stepped over the threshold slowly, cautiously, like someone entering a sacred place, like someone returning to a home they weren't sure still belonged to them. The door closed behind them with a soft click. And just like that, 3 began. A different act, new shape. A story no longer made of memories alone, but of choices, of what would happen now. The door's soft click seemed to echo far longer than it should have, stretching through the small room, weaving itself into the very air they breathed. For a long moment, they simply stood facing each other, mother and daughter, years of distance balancing between them like a thread stretched thin enough to snap. Zuri's eyes wavered over the room first, as though searching for something familiar. The small shelf, kettle, the stacks of folded fabric, the sewing machine, the dress resting near the window like a sliver of captured light. Her gaze lingered there the longest. The mother watched this quietly, her hands tightening around the edge of her apron, not in anger, not in fear, but in that strange, trembling place where heartbreak meets hope. Zuri's throat bobbed with a hard swallow. "I didn't know you were still making it." She spoke carefully, as if every word might cut skin. Her mother didn't answer immediately. She stepped past her gently, moving toward the table where bits of thread and loose beads waited to be used. She needed something to touch, to anchor her. "I had to finish it," she said softly. "Leaving things half done. It never sits right with me." Zuri lowered her eyes. Shame flickered across her features, faint yet unmistakable. "Is it for the wedding?" Her mother didn't look at her. "You threw it away." A sharp breath escaped Zuri, one of those breaths that carried memory and regret tangled together. "I know," she whispered. "I know I did. I was." Her voice broke. "I was stupid." The word didn't feel enough. It hovered helplessly in the air, too small to cover the weight of what had been done. Her mother didn't turn, didn't argue, didn't comfort. She only adjusted a bead between her fingertips, examining its tiny imperfect shine. Zuri stepped closer, each footfall slow, cautious, as though approaching an animal that had been wounded too many times. "Things aren't going well," she said. "The wedding. Everything is falling apart. Samir's family." She stopped herself. Her lips trembled. "They think I'm difficult, too demanding, too emotional." Her mother's eyelids lowered at that, but she kept her voice even. "And what do you think you are?" Zuri opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Silence filled the room again. Not heavy, just real. It was the first honest silence they'd shared in years. The mother finally turned, and Zuri's breath stilled. Her mother's face wasn't angry, it was tired. Not the tiredness of work, but the exhaustion that comes from carrying unspoken pain for too long. "I stitched that dress with my whole heart," she said quietly. "Not because you asked, not because you needed it, but because I wanted to give you something no one else could." Zuri's eyes filled, shimmering like water threatening to spill. "I know," she whispered hoarsely. "I didn't see it then." "Do you see it now?" her mother asked. Zuri nodded helplessly. "I do. Mama. I do." A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, almost angrily, as if the act of crying proved everyone else right about her being too emotional. Her mother watched her, really watched her. For the first time in a long time, she saw not just the woman Zuri had become, but the frightened child inside her. The child who once twirled in scrap fabric. The child who used to run to her with scraped knees. The child who believed her mother could fix anything with a needle and thread. "Mama," Zuri whispered, voice cracking. "I don't know what to do anymore." The mother's breath trembled. This moment was the wound. The opening. The raw, truth-filled place where things could either heal or break forever. She moved slowly toward the window, lifted the dress gently, and held it in her hands. Zuri watched her with wide, unsure eyes. The mother didn't hand it to her. Didn't offer comfort. Didn't rush forgiveness. She simply spoke. "You came here because something in your life broke. But before we fix anything, Zuri, you need to tell me the truth." Zuri blinked, startled. "The truth about what?" she whispered. Her mother held her gaze, steady, unwavering. "The truth about why you came back." The room went still. Outside, a breeze brushed against the house, rattling a loose shutter. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Life moved on, unaware of the delicate, trembling moment unfolding inside the small sewing room. Zuri's lips parted. She inhaled slowly, painfully, like someone preparing to uncover a wound still bleeding. "I came back," she said, voice breaking, "because Samir called off the wedding." The words hit the air like a stone dropped in still water. Heavy, unavoidable, rippling. Her mother's fingers tightened around the dress. Zuri's shoulders shook. And just like that, the entire world shifted again. Her mother did not gasp, did not cry out, did not rush forward with frantic questions or the comfort Zuri clearly expected. She simply stood still, the dress hanging from her hands like a captured breath. Zuri looked at her mother's face, searching, hoping for something soft, something forgiving, something easy. She found none of it. Only quiet. Only a stillness that demanded truth instead of consoling it. Zuri's eyes brimmed, her voice trembling. He said he's not sure anymore. About me. About us. About the wedding." She swallowed hard. "He thinks I'm complicated. Too much work." The words seemed to shrink her. A woman who usually walked like she owned every room suddenly looked small, folding inward with every confession. Her mother's gaze lowered to the dress, following the curve of the fabric as if it were a map of all the years that had shaped her life. Then she set it gently, very gently, on the table before finally speaking. "What did you do," she asked quietly, "to make him say such things?" Zuri stiffened. That wasn't the question she'd expected. Not what did he do? Not how could he say that? Just the truth turned back on her. Zuri hesitated, choking on the words. "We argued. Got angry. I said things I didn't mean. I pushed him to make everything perfect. The arrangements, the decor, the guest lists. Everything." Her breath shuddered. I wanted the wedding to be flawless. I didn't want people to judge me. People? Her mother asked calmly. Or you yourself? Zuri's eyes flicked away, stung by the accuracy. Her mother continued, voice low but unwavering. You have always chased perfection, Zuri. Even when you were a child. Even when you had nothing, you wanted more. And I tried, God knows I tried, to give you what I could. But somewhere along the way, you forgot who you were. Zuri flinched. I forgot who you were too, she whispered, shame spilling through her voice like ink on cloth. The words hit the mother, but she didn't show it, not fully. Her eyes softened just a fraction. A tiny crack in the armor. Zuri took a slow step closer. I came here because I didn't know where else to go. Her voice broke completely. I didn't know who else would still care. The mother inhaled sharply through her nose, grounding herself. There it was. The truth hidden beneath the wreckage. Her daughter, so polished, so proud, so untouchable, was now standing before her, stripped down to fear and regret and loneliness. Sit, her mother said quietly. Zuri blinked. Mama. Sit. Her tone wasn't angry. It was decisive. It was the tone of a woman ready to finally take control of a story that had long ago slipped from her hands. Zuri obeyed, lowering herself onto the small wooden chair near the sewing table. She looked strangely out of place, like a jewel set into plain metal. Her mother stood before her, arms crossed loosely, expression unreadable. Tell me everything, she said. And Zuri did. Talk. She unraveled. She confessed the pressure she put on herself, the lies she told to keep up appearances, the insecurity that gnawed at her every time she compared her life to others. And the mother listened. Not as a seamstress, not as a woman wronged, but as someone who had waited years for this moment of raw honesty. At one point Zuri choked out. I thought, if the wedding looked perfect, then I would look perfect. And if I looked perfect, maybe he would love me more. A deep sigh trembled through the mother's chest, heavy with truths she'd carried alone for too long. Zuri, she said, stepping closer, love does not grow from perfection. It grows from presence, from truth, from patience. And you cannot demand those things from someone else when you've never offered them to yourself. Tears fell freely from Zuri's eyes. I don't know how to fix it, she whispered. Her mother shook her head slowly. It is not your wedding that needs fixing, she said. It is you. Zuri clenched her hands in her lap, trembling. And if I can't fix myself? She asked, voice barely audible. Her mother reached toward the dress, brushing the fabric with her fingertips. Then you learn, she said simply. Just like you learn to walk, to speak, to dream. You learn how to be a woman who knows her worth. Zuri swallowed thickly. And if Samir doesn't come back? Her mother's eyes lifted, meeting her daughter's with a steadiness that silenced the room. Then he was never meant for the woman you are meant to become. Zuri's breath caught. The words didn't hurt. They healed. Quietly, slowly, honest as a needle passing through cloth. Her mother turned, lifting the dress once more. Only this time. She carried it toward Zuri. Zuri's eyes widened. Mama! Her mother didn't place it on her lap. Didn't offer it as a gift. Instead she said, whether you wear this dress or not is not what matters. She leaned down. Her voice softened. What matters, Zuri, is whether you are ready to become a woman worthy of it. Zuri's breath trembled, her heart aching with something unfamiliar and overwhelming. Not guilt, not fear, not shame, but recognition. And for the first time in her life, she whispered, I want to try. Her mother nodded slowly, the faintest trace of a smile touching her tired lips. Then we begin, she said. Not with the dress. Not with the wedding. But with truth. A new thread. A new stitch. A new beginning. The ballroom fell silent. Not because of the music stopping. Not because of a grand announcement. But because every single eye had turned toward the woman now standing beneath the chandelier's golden light. She wasn't wearing the imported Paris gown. She wasn't wrapped in luxury or glitter. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She walked forward in her mother's dress, restored, reborn, transformed. A masterpiece of lace, crystals, hand-stitched flowers, and decades of sacrifice woven into every inch. The fabric shimmered like moonlight on water. The embroidery glowed like constellations on her skin. The dress breathed, alive with the story of generations. And Zuri walked like she finally understood who she was. The crowd whispered, stunned by her radiance. Not the radiance of perfection, but the radiance of truth. Samir froze at the altar. For a heartbeat he forgot to breathe. He had never seen her like this. Grounded, gentle, powerful, whole. Zuri stopped a few feet away from him, her chest rising with a steady breath. Her mother stood at the back of the hall, hands clasped tightly, watching her daughter with quiet strength blooming in her eyes. Everyone waited. Zuri lifted her chin. "I won't pretend anymore," she said, her voice echoing through the vast hall. "I won't chase perfection. I won't break myself to please others. And I won't enter a marriage built on fear." A murmur rippled through the room. Samir stepped forward, shaken. "Zuri, I never asked you to be perfect." "No," she whispered. "But I thought I had to be." She looked at her mother. The woman who had held her through storms. The woman who had loved her even when she didn't know how to love herself. "My mother stitched this dress with her heart," she said. "And I refused it because I couldn't see my own worth. But now, I do." Her mother's eyes filled. The hall glowed with a silence that felt like prayer. Zuri turned back to Samir. "If we go forward, it will be with honesty, with acceptance, with respect." He paused. "And if you're not ready, I will walk away with my head high." Samir stared at her. At the woman she had become. Not the girl he had known. Then slowly, deeply, he bowed his head. "Zuri," he breathed. "I don't want perfection. I want you. All of you." The room softened with relief. Zuri's lips trembled, her eyes burning. She didn't step into his arms immediately. She stepped back, just a little, and said, "Before anything else, I need to say something." She turned toward her mother. The hall parted for her as she walked, a bride in a gown of forgiveness and courage. She reached her mother, her voice breaking open. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused, for the disrespect, for forgetting who made me strong." Her mother touched her cheek, hands trembling. "You found your way," she said softly. "That is all a mother ever asks." The two women embraced. Not quietly, not timidly, but with the fierce love of a bond reforged in fire. The applause began slowly, then grew, then thundered. A celebration not of a wedding, but of two women rising from the ruins of misunderstanding. Zuri walked back to the altar, carrying her mother's love like a shield. Samir extended his hand. This time she didn't hesitate. As they stood together, the officiant smiled. "Shall we begin?" Zuri glanced at her mother, who nodded once, proud and steady. Zuri breathed out. "Yes," she said. "Let's begin." The lights glowed brighter. The music swelled. The world seemed to exhale. And beneath the chandelier, wrapped in the dress stitched with sacrifice, With courage in her heart and her mother's love at her back, Zuri stepped into her new life. Not perfect, not flawless, just real, strong, just herself. That, finally, was enough.